Slide. So I'm Blake. I've been doing the AR and VR development for the last, I guess, 3 or 4 years. I'm full-time doing work at DB, making VR and AR games. Before that, I worked at Microsoft building enterprise HoloLens applications for the HoloLens 1 and 2. And Dustin, you want to introduce yourself?
For sure, yeah. Hi, I'm Dustin. I work at DB part-time. I've been working with Blake since we founded the company back in 2015. My full-time job is a AAA video game developer, but I really like working on VR and AR stuff as well.
Cool. Next slide. Yeah, so we're going to start off by showing you the trailer for the Nreal version of Table Trenches, which just released on the Google Play Store and the LG One Store. Can you play the trailer? If it plays. Not, we can
for any reason it's not working.
Okay. No worries. We can, I mean, you can kind of see what it looks like from there. We can just go to the next slide then. We have a couple of videos, so if those don't work, then we'll just skip through them. You can go, yeah. All right, Dustin, do you want to start us off by talking about what Table Trenches is?
For sure, yeah. So if we had been able to show the video, you might have seen that Table Trenches is a casual real-time strategy game. We specifically designed it from the beginning to be AR, so not something that we ported, but actually something we started out saying, hey, we want to make an AR game. Basically, we use use the phone or the headset camera to scan your table, couch, or whatever, and get a plane that we can use to build out a virtual battlefield that's scaled to match your environment. So we allow you to scale to fit you whatever surface you're playing on. And the gameplay is kind of simple to like Clash Royale. You're capturing towers, you're deploying units, you're fighting in sort of a real-time strategy sort of way, and trying to beat either an AI or a local co-op or a local versus player in a multiplayer match. We have another video on the next slide that was another gameplay video. We'll see if it works. It may not.
No, it's not. Sorry.
Not a problem. All right, so glad we have the slide where we talk a little bit about what the game is then. So yeah, there's more screenshots and stuff that hopefully give you a little bit more flavor for what Table Trenches is all about. But a lot of people ask us when we're talking about, AR games, it's a pretty new market segment, like, why even make AR games? And for us, there's a couple of core reasons. I think the first one is that, like, as a company, we're really excited about working on the cutting edge of technologies, especially mixed reality stuff. We really like finding new trends and becoming experts in the field. We've done it with VR back in 2015 with an ebook reader that we built. Now we're trying to do it with AR, with Table Trenches. We really like building games, especially for these new technology platforms. We find that's an area that isn't being invested in as much by a lot of more core game companies. And so for us, this is a way to stand out and also get to work on some new and exciting tech, which we really enjoy. Obviously, I think everybody in this room probably agrees, AR is the next big disruptive technology market. We already see it with, LiDAR camera in iPhones. We've got HMDs coming out like the Nreal Light, and it really seems like AR is poised to grow massively, and we want to be making content for that. And lastly, AR glasses are already here. We've got the Nreal Light coming out, in Korea and Japan, leader in the space there. And we see these new devices coming out and say, like, well, people are going to need content for them, games especially. Everybody wants to have something to do on their new headset, or phone when they pick it up and see that cool tech. So we think it's a really interesting spot to be building content for. So next slide, please. So I wanted to talk about, we went too far. Can we go back one? Perfect, thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about some of our design philosophies when we're designing AR games. The first one that's really, really important to us is like playing to the strengths of the technology. This is something that we think is really core to any thing we're going to build at DB Creations, which is like taking advantage of what tech can do right now. We see a lot of games in the space, taking existing flat screen concepts and just porting them directly to AR without taking advantage of any of the unique things it offers, which we think is really frustrating because there's a lot of really cool potential and unexplored space in these new technologies, and we want to use that as opposed to just taking stuff that already exists and copy pasting it over. So when we looked at the mobile AR space, which is the original platform we launched Table Trenches for on iOS and Android, the thing we found it could do really effectively was get plane data and allow you to put 3D objects on that plane. The APIs were already built and existed, and they exist for the Nreal headset as well. they're ready to build for, which made it so that we didn't have to build out a bunch of custom technology. We could just focus on building out fun gameplay, which if there's any game developers in the room, you guys know, like, that's the hardest part of game design is, figuring out that fun, what is really interesting about your game for people to play with. So that was important to us to be able to do what the technology can already do well, as opposed to have to invent it ourselves. So next slide, please. Another thing I wanted to talk a little bit about was some of our gameplay design philosophy. We're making games after all. And the things we thought about when we were figuring out, hey, what kind of game are we going to make? So the first thing is we kind of go back to. Oh, I've got an echo from somebody. If you could please mute, that would be.
Hey, Peter, can you mute, please?
Yeah. Is it better?
No.
Sorry for anyone who's just joined the session. Please just mute yourself.
I think we might be good. I think we're good. I don't hear
Yeah,
myself.
I think we're good.
Cool. Thank
yeah.
you so much.
All right. Keep going.
Unique fun of presenting in virtual reality. So yeah, thinking about what kind of gameplay can we make with this technology? Obviously, we've got a plane. We can put stuff on it. And for us, that really meant like virtual toys. Building digital stuff for your physical world. Not surprising to anybody here, I'm sure. But for us, this was our first attempt at playing around with that concept in a game. So we wanted to make something that was playful, fun. Looking at things, like playing around with army men or like toy cars on your desk, things like that. We looked to the strategy game genre as a space we wanted to try and work in. We think it's pretty underserved for the MR space generally. Like, there's not a lot of strategy titles in VR or AR. But which is interesting because it's a super popular genre, for PC and mobile markets. So we wanted to kind of play around with that space a little bit. And also we think, strategy appeals to a wide target demographic, people that maybe aren't as interested in like hardcore action, but might be interested in more, high-level strategic thinking. We wanted to kind of capture people that exist in that space, which maybe aren't getting as many games built for them. And also looking at the global market, strategy is a pretty like worldwide, genre that appeals broadly. And so we wanted to build something that had a global appeal where possible. And of course, I couldn't stand up here in front of you as a producer in video games and not talk a little bit about scope. It's kind of what I do. So we had to make something that was scoped to what our team could do. We're a small team. We have several part-time developers and also, work with several contractors. So for us, like keeping dev costs down and, making something that we can actually ship within about a year for this project was really, really important for us. So we looked to existing games, like I mentioned, Clash Royale as a starting point. We also wanted to build something that had multiplayer, even though it's a little bit hard because it allowed us to avoid needing like a story mode or campaign content, which is traditionally very expensive to develop and only played once. So next slide, please. Can I get the next slide? Thank you. So next thing I wanted to talk a little bit about was something I like to call the magic of AR. I think once again, folks in this room are probably pretty aware, but thinking about it from a games lens, like magic of AR to me is really all about that merging of the player's world with the digital world the game provides. Like I said, a lot of games really weren't taking advantage of this like X factor that I think AR brings to the table. They really just took flat screen games and ported them without really thinking about, hey, what makes this magical? What makes this really cool and exciting for players? One thing that really helped us achieve this goal was allowing people to resize their play space. So, being able to take the plane that their phone or headset finds and like scale it up or down so it matches the table, the couch, whatever that they're actually playing the game on. That really allows it to feel a little bit more magical because the units in the game are respecting the bounds of the player's world. And so you feel like, these units are actually in the real world, even though we're just doing a simple, plane check, which I thought was a really, really powerful thing there. And also AR is inherently social, like because it involves, multiple people if you're playing multiplayer in the same physical space, experiencing the same, virtual units, in that space. We found that to be really exciting, like in playtesting. We were surprised at actually how magical it is to have a shared AR experience with someone, where only you can see what's happening in the game board together. We thought that was really cool. So next slide. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about constraints. I think there's a lot of really awesome things AR can do when it comes to game design, but also there's a couple new constraints that we ran into along the way that really shaped some of the decisions we made about table trenches when we were building it. So a couple of quick ones I'll just run through here. Like the first one, AR drains your mobile device batteries pretty fast. So how did we solve that? We made sure that the game had short matches so that you wouldn't have to spend a lot of time, burning down your phone battery to play or experience the game, at the first time you play it. We also found like a lot of people are unfamiliar with AR
I'm
tech.
sorry, I think we just lost your voice.
Oh no.
Did anybody just hear? Oh, it's okay. It's good now,
We
I
good?
think.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
can hear
we're
him.
good.
Perfect. Thanks for calling it out, though. Definitely don't want people to not be able to hear me. That would be very awkward. Right. So, yeah, we found a lot of people are unfamiliar with AR tech and could get stuck in the setup. They haven't done plain fine flows before. They haven't had to like do that sort of scanning with their phone. And so we spent a lot of time really polishing up the onboarding experience to make sure that people could, find that plane and get into the game quickly. We also added in some hooks to monitor analytics post-launch so we could figure out if people were getting stuck, at what phase are they getting stuck, to make sure we made changes there. Also, the game interface is part of the window into gameplay, and by that I mean like the phone screen is the way people look and see the entire world, and so we need to be able to make sure that they can see as much of that as possible. So we had to make sure our UI was super minimal so that people could see the game, through their phone's camera or their HMD's camera as much as possible. And lastly, AR adoption is pretty low, so a lot of people won't have a local multiplayer companion. They've convinced to buy an AR game as well. So we added a versus AI mode so that solo players could also enjoy the game. Next slide, please. I think this won't be a surprise to anybody in here who has done any game development, but like game development is super iterative, right? Like the early versions of what we were building were nothing like the final thing we shipped. We were experimenting with 2D for units for a while. We actually had flat sprites that were camera facing, so that would be a unique style. Totally didn't work for AR. Like it wasn't compatible at all. We also used to have a concept of just like units driving all over the place and kind of like being guided by pathfinding wherever they wanted to go, but it meant that they just kind of went crazy, and so you couldn't really control what was going on. So we added in a lane concept to make sure that players could actually move their units where they wanted. And really, we found a lot of these things through rigorous playtesting and agile style production. So constantly evaluating in weekly team feedback playtests, like, hey, how is this looking? How is this playing? Like, what changes do we want to make? And also, we did quarterly build reviews as a way to like really dial in, like, hey, do we make any big pivots? As we're getting this thing stood up, and figuring out how it's going to work. And lastly, like, I think it's important to remember that like this tech is evolving and changing as you build stuff. I mean, like even the difference between, the year we started building out Table Trenches to now, like lots of things have changed and you have to be ready to adapt to that stuff. So having an agile mentality in your game development will help you a lot in that space too, because you won't have to worry as much about like, oh man, if the tech changes out from underneath us, what do we do? If you're constantly making those evaluations, you'll be in good shape. Next slide, please. And so lastly, I just wanted to end with a couple of like miscellaneous thoughts that don't really fit into like one neat category, but I think they're really important. And they're stuff we kind of learned developing an AR game for the mobile market, and now onto the Nreal Light HMD. So for us, like we've really realized AR is a global market, and one of the other presenters was talking about that as well. Like for us, this meant like making sure you're thinking about localization and worldwide appeal, both in your game design as well as like the actual execution of the game. So having your marketing assets, your trailers and stuff, all professionally translated and localized, really we found went a long way to finding new markets we weren't actually, necessarily targeting from the get-go. Like EU and Asian markets especially were really strong for us, we found so far. We have found, and this may be unique to us, but like we found a pretty limited press appetite for AR content. There's not a lot of press outlets that are looking to cover AR games, especially. And so it's definitely been a challenge for us to get the message out about Table Trenches to folks. However, the market's also still learning what AR even is, and how to show it to customers. Flat 2D videos only do so much to show off what really makes an AR game special. So discoverability is pretty low, unless you're on a dedicated device like the Nreal, where we find that like people who are opting into those experiences are obviously knowing that they're getting into AR games, and that seems to be a much better market if it, where you can get onto those sort of things. And lastly, kind of ending on a positive note, I guess, is that like once people do see what an AR game can do, what makes it interesting, especially a game that's specifically designed for AR, people get really interested. Like we find a much higher interest curve after that kind of discovery phase because it's novel, it's interesting, it's fresh. People haven't seen it before, and they see how it blends, their physical world with this digital game, and that's something they haven't really seen before. And so, once it's discovered, it seems like people really enjoy this sort of stuff, and so we're really excited and buoyed by that. It's just getting that message out that's been the trick. So that's just a really quick overview of some of the stuff we've learned, as we were developing Table Trenches. So now I'm going to give it over to Blake, who's going to talk about some of the specifics of porting the game to work on the Nreal headset.
Thanks, Dustin. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah, so like Dustin mentioned earlier, one of the key things whenever we're trying to figure out what type of game or how we're going to take advantage best of a platform is to analyze what the platform can do well. We have a lot of experience with different AR devices, and a lot of the concerns we had going in before we got our actual Unreal device had to do around color uniformity, contrast. A lot of the other headsets out there, AR headsets, don't do those type of things very well. So we were worried about, all right, how are we going to have to redo our content to look better on this display? Fortunately, the Nreal Light doesn't really suffer from a lot of the display issues that other headsets suffer from because of the nature of the display technology. So we didn't actually have to do any work in porting our game to be more color uniform or even change UI assets to change their aspect ratio or anything. The next part was figuring out, all right, what are the controls going to be for Table Trenches? Since we were porting it from a mobile touchscreen game into a AR headset environment. So there's kind of two different control mechanisms that Nreal supports. One of them is using your phone or your dev kit as a 3-DOF cursor. The other one is just being able to use the phone screen as a normal phone screen. And so we actually use a hybrid of those controls in Table Trenches. A lot of our menus, you use a 3-DOF cursor to select different things. When you're actually playing the game, to select the tower that you're spawning units from, you're also using the phone 3-DOF. But then for a lot of our auxiliary menus, since they're really information dense, we kept them in 2D, and the user can interact with them on 2D on their phone. And we didn't bring them into 3D because it's way easier to see and use that information in a 2D environment. So that hybrid approach actually worked really, really well for us as we were transitioning our game to the device. And then finally, looking at how the headset works. So it's a 6-DOF tracked headset. The way that it does its plane find is very similar to what we saw in ARCAD AR Core, where it gives you kind of a planar region that it knows about from a bunch of like coplanar anchor points. And so we can just use that as kind of the best guess plane, and that's our best formulation as to what the play space should look like. And then as a previous presenter mentioned, there's no depth, so it's really simple information for us to use when constructing our world. Next slide. We actually started on the development of the Nreal version very close to when we initially shipped Table Trenches. Back then, we were just hooked up with the SDK. We didn't have a dev kit yet, and so we really did probably 80 or 90% of our port work all in the Unity editor. And I have a video that I'm not sure we'll play that kind of shows what it looked like when we were in that phase of development. After that, it was really all about just verifying on the different various devices. So when we got our Nreal dev kit in August, we were able to port to that. And the main thing we had to do things with was making sure it ran properly on the device, fixing various permissions issues, doing control validation now that we had an actual device, it wasn't just emulator. And then when we got the phone, it was doing some of the work I mentioned earlier, which is making some of those auxiliary menus just work on the actual phone screen, and then changing some of the controls around since the dev kit and the phone are actually a bit different. And then in November, we actually launched on the LG One Store and the Google Play Store for the Korean and Japanese markets, respectively. That was really just doing some finishing polish. So we're out now, and we're going to continue to do updates, especially as new features come online and new markets. But we're really excited to be shipping alongside the Japanese launch. Next slide. Will this video play? If not, you can see here kind of on the left, this is like the Unity emulator. We had everything working in the like so-called like Nreal living room. And you can see that we just had like our normal Table Trenches game working there. And then you can emulate like the headset and the 3-DOF controller. So we just hooked all that up in the actual editor. And like I said, that was most of the work in getting it working on the device. Even though it's a little bit more lo-fi than I've seen with other emulators. It's actually a lot more effective because it all's just within Unity, and it really worked really well. Next slide. Will that video play since it's embedded? So one of the things, oh, awesome. All right, now you can see a video. So one of the things we wanted to go over as part of the port to Nreal was take probably what I would say is the most complicated user experience for our application, which I think is going to be true for most applications and games in AR for the near term, but hopefully becomes something that the users don't even think about one day, which is figuring out how the user takes the real world space and basically modifies it to tell us how they want their game space to look. So the way that this works currently on our mobile version is that the user scans their floor or table using their device. We automatically pick a plane based on a heuristic. Our heuristic being, is there a plane currently where they're looking at? If not, then just choose the closest plane to them. You then give them the ability to refine a plane if the plane that we auto chose wasn't the correct one. We auto choose for them because it's very messy data to show them all the possible planes that the device or system has found. And then we give them a bunch of edit tools to be able to match the digitally found plane up to the real world space, because currently none of these devices really do a great job at being super accurate in fitting to either a table, or if it's a floor, you're not. It's very hard as a developer to make a guess as to what size and aspect ratio they want to be playing on the floor. So we have capabilities to rotate. We also have capabilities to change the aspect ratio, meaning so that they can fit the game world to the surface better. And then we also have the ability to do uniform scale. Figuring out that aspect ratio and figuring out the way to do aspect ratio and uniform scale was probably one of our hardest UX challenges, because our initial thought was that aspect ratio and uniform scale would be tied variables, but making them independent, I think makes a lot more sense to users and also makes it a lot easier to configure your game space. And then finally, we have a capability for translation where the user can translate their game space around the infinite plane that we found, so in case they want to move it to a different location on their floor. Next slide. And then can you play that video? So then this is how we changed everything for Nreal. So the way that we changed translation is we made it so that there's Nreal finds kind of a plane segment. And so with the 3-dot cursor pointing at a plane segment and then confirming, we just make it so that the user can choose which point on the plane they would like the center of their world to be. For rotation and scale, we actually just use the user's mobile phone still, where the kind of rotate gesture that I think a lot of people are used to on mobile rotates the plane, and then separating your fingers apart does uniform scale still. Then aspect ratio is basically us converting the touchscreen controls into 3-dot controls, where they hit an edit button and then they're able to grab different handles. I think you can see in the video to change what the actual aspect ratio of the game space plane they're dealing with is. And then finally, we're still doing the auto plane find for our users, so that they don't have to think through, okay, I don't know which surface that I actually want to play on. But we give them a button in here as well to rediscover or refine which one they want to use. Next slide. The other thing I want to talk about in terms of the actual UI is how we ported some of our 2D UI into 3D. So there were 2 techniques that we used, one of which is really common, billboarding. Billboarding is just that you're always facing the UI towards the user so that they can use it and interact with it. This is a pretty common technique in VR AR. The other one is I guess the other big problem that you always have when you're building anything in AR VR is where are you going to put your menu? We decided for our game to do plane anchored menus. What that means is that we always have the UI at a fixed position above the plane that they're playing on. We thought that worked really well because the user is always going to be wanting to interact with that game space, that plane, and having the UI there is just works really well rather than having it full in front of them or having it at some other fixed position in space. One of the things I think that we can probably improve in the future is we currently don't do any type of UI auto scaling or UI thresholded scaling based on their view window. So that's something probably we'll add in the future. Next slide. Yep. So the last thing we want to talk about, I think this is a YouTube video, so it won't work, is video capture. So when we were initially trying to show off our Nreal footage to people, we used the compositor where we composite the Nreal RGB camera alongside the digital information or the digital gameplay. The Nreal camera isn't super optimized for capture. I think I've seen this with a lot of AR devices where the RGB camera isn't as powerful as your phone camera. So what we ended up doing, and I should have mentioned this earlier when we were talking about the emulation, is we actually have a version, we basically have the Nreal version running on iOS devices, which is really just making it so that all of the UI is world space. So that's how we do all of the capture for our game. When we share it out, is we actually just use an iOS device, and we cut off anything that looks like it's iOS-y, and then we share that out. And there's another way you can do this as well, which is you could use an Nreal device, and then you could network that data to like an iOS device and then sync up the anchors. But we think the emulated iOS capture is, or you could do this with like any dedicated smartphone, really presents a really nice image because the cameras on the phones are really optimized for high quality photography. And the other really nice thing is that you don't have to worry about everything looks super opaque. And you don't have to worry about blacks or anything not showing because it's a opaque display and not an additive light display. Next slide. Yeah, so really porting to Nreal wasn't too much of a hassle at all. We think the game really shines in Nreal. We really always built the game with HMDs in mind. And being able to play it on HMD, I think, is really magical. I should also mention, we didn't put this in the deck, the game does support multiplayer on Nreal as well. So you can play multiplayer in our game between two different Nreal users, or if someone's just on their Android phone and they don't have to have an Nreal headset, they can also play it. And like we said, that shared experience is really what makes everything magical. So thank you all for your time, and we'd love to answer any questions you have.
Thank you.
Awesome. I had a question, Blake. This is Jason, the indie dev on Slack, Engage VR. And I had a question around performance. Was there a way to benchmark your performance in the case, I guess, your AI or animations? Did you see any battery drain there, out of curiosity?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think one of the early issues we had with the game was batching the skinned mesh render animations. And so we optimized that because the min spec for mobile phones is actually pretty low for AR, not for Nreal, but for like general like ARCore ARKit. Like the iPhone 6s is our min spec, and then like the Samsung Galaxy S6. And the Galaxy S6 gets really, really hot when you're playing our game. Maybe dangerously so. So we did do a lot of optimizations early on to make sure that we could batch all of the units on screen as they're moving, which we actually just kind of use a flipbook animation style for that. What that meant though is that because our min spec was really low in terms of mobile, and Nreal's is a very high min spec comparatively, we didn't actually have to do much performance work when porting. We even still use our screen space edge outline shader on Nreal, which is kind of a taboo in VR AR performance. And we haven't, I think we stay at 60. I don't think we dip. So, and then we just verify all of that with like a combination of the Unity profiler, the Snapdragon profiler, and then RenderDoc.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, because I'm not really running into an issue as of yet, but I have some particle stuff, and I think I'm going to do some workarounds to kind of minimize some of that stuff. But it's awesome to see you guys kind of go through the process, and congrats on launching on Nreal or Play Store.
Oh,
So I'm
thank you.
definitely gonna see if I can try to access it.
Awesome. Thank you. Cool.
Okay, so I think it's time to move to our AMA. So it's like Ask Me Anything part, and well.